Yes, sir, we can start.
Good evening, friends. Welcome to this session, which is the first January session in 2025. We did not have a couple of sessions in the last few weeks after we completed our IDPS 2024, and then we ran into the year end. So we could not have JVS. Otherwise, it is a weekly program, 7 to 8. Those who are in the Telegram group will get the invite directly. Otherwise, if you are in some other group, maybe you will be able to see the invitations. So please join the Telegram group or follow us on LinkedIn. Perhaps you will be able to get the invitations to this weekly knowledge meets. This week we have the recently passed DPDPA rules, and those of you who have been following DPDPA are aware that in July 27th in Bangalore we conducted a day-long program on the then available draft of DPDPA rules, which has been slightly modified now, not much, but only 2 additional rules have been um, introduced a minor changes. So otherwise, we had a full discussion for a day on the DPDPA draft rules. At that time, many people thought that that was not the rules which will be coming forth, but more or less the same has come now. So let us now discuss this new set of rules, which has been released on January 3rd. We already know that the uh, DPDPA, we have a fairly good understanding so far, and a lot of discussions have taken place. So the Act discusses the applicability, discusses the roles, it discusses the legal basis, consent, legitimate use, alternatives. It also discusses the obligations of the data fiduciary and the rights of data principals to be protected by a data fiduciary. It talks about the data protection board and penalties, and also the data breach notification. These are all the essential features of the Data Protection Act. But what we now have is the DPDPA rules, which we will take a quick glance. Okay. Basically, the DPDPA rules expands the meaning of different aspects which are there in the law. But as we know, DPDPA is law. Therefore, the compliance of DPDPA is more or less guided by the law itself. Rules can only make minor changes because it cannot be ultra vires main act. Now, the earlier draft version, which we discussed on July 27, had 20 rules and 7 schedules, and this has got 22 rules and 7 schedules. Just to take a look at what kind of rules are there, the rule 1 starts with the date of effect, and it says that some rules will be effective immediately on notification and some on future dates. Then, as far as the definitions column is concerned, last time they had given a set of definitions exclusively for the rules. This time, correctly, they have deleted the definitions section and said that whatever definitions are already there in the Act, that will be applicable for the terms used in the rules. Then we have the consent and notice under Rule 3 and 4. There is discussion about consent manager under Rule 5. And the schedule explains a little more in detail about the consent manager's eligibility criteria as well as the obligations. Then we have Rule 6, which talks about the standards for the processing of personal data by the government. Then Rule 7 is on data breach. Rule 8 talks about the mandatory, or let us say suggested date on which period after which personal data which is no longer required for a process has to be deleted. And Rule 9 is a simple explanation that contact information of DPO has to be furnished. 10 and 11 are important because it discusses the rules regarding the verifiable consent of our minors. as well as the exemptions which are available to certain categories of data fiduciaries. Rule 12 is about significant data fiduciaries. One important aspect there is about the periodicity of the data audit, which we are very much interested in. We have actually developed the DGPSI framework. There's a lot of say efforts on developing the framework, and that data audit will be required to be done mandatorily once in a year for significant data fiduciaries. In fact, we did conduct a 3-day physical program on transforming the auditors of the current generation to data auditors in Bangalore in September, and now we are repeating that on January 24th, 25th, and 26th in Mumbai. It will be inaugurated by CERTIN, because CERTIN has been supporting this program and recommending to all the CERTIN accredited auditors that they should go through this C.DPO.DA training program conducted by FDPPI. Following that 3-day program, there is an open invitation for the participants to take the examination and complete their certification process. All that is related to this rule on significant data fiduciaries, who have to do the annual data audit starting from 1 year after the date of effectiveness. Of course, the effectiveness of this particular provision may be taken up after some time, but anyway, as and when the entire act becomes effective, 1 year from that date, it becomes mandatory for significant data fiduciaries to undergo a data audit. There are a few companies who have already started this process, and we are involved in a couple of such activities. We hope others will also catch up soon. Rule number 13 is regarding the rights of data principals to be protected. Rule number 14 is processing of personal data outside India. This appears to be a new rule which has been added to the previous 20 and speaks of the possibility of more information on restrictions on cross-border transfer. Now, Rule 15 is exemptions for research, etc., for which the standards have been prescribed. Then Rule 16 to 20 is regarding the constitution of the Data Protection Board, how the chairman will be selected, how the members will be selected, and what will be the terms of appointment, and so on, which is not very much relevant for the companies for compliance, but it is important to be done immediately. Then rule number 21 talks about appeal to the appellate tribunal, and 22 is again another new rule which talks about the invocation of the powers under Section 36 of the Data Protection Act, DPDPA, calling for information from data fiduciary or intermediary, for which the government is going to designate certain officers, and one of those officers will be responsible for looking at an organization and determining its status as a significant data fiduciary. So there will be an official assigned in the ministry to look at the status of a significant data fiduciary. There will be other officials who will be looking at certain other requirements for which some continuous, you can say, interaction is required with the industry. There are 7 schedules. The first schedule, both Part A and Part B, is regarding the consent manager. Second schedule is on standards for processing by the state. Schedule 3 is time period for erasure when the data is no longer required to be required for the purpose for which it was collected. Schedule 4, Part A and Part B talks about the minors, and Schedule 5 and 6 talks about the salaries, terms and conditions of the DPB, etc. So Schedule 7 speaks of the authorized persons who are there designated, who will be designated for the purpose of this information. Now, as far as Rule 1 is concerned, what we need to note is that Rules 3 to 15 as well as 21 and 22 will not come into effect on the date of publication. There will be a separate date of publication. Whereas Rule 1, 2, as well as 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20, which are all related to the constitution of DPB, they will come into force as soon as the particular document is published in the official gazette. I think there is a small error there. 21, 22 may come up later. Okay. Now, the definitions, as I told you, has been removed because it is not required. It's already there in the Act. Now, as far as the notice and consent is concerned, there is not much of a change. In the earlier rules, the government had given a model notice. It is good that they have removed the model notice. Right now, what is required is, as described in the Act, that there should be an itemized description of what personal data is being collected, what is the purpose, and also provide the links to the withdrawal of the consent, exercising of the rights, and making of a complaint. So this is the requirement under notice. For each purpose, we have to develop a notice. We had, under the DGPSI, always insisted on the compliance to be built up based on each process. That is, ours is a process-centric approach to compliance, and each process will have a purpose, and each purpose will have a notice. That is how this has to be done, rather than creating one comprehensive notice for various purposes for which an organization will be collecting the personal information. Now, the conditions which will be applicable for registration of a consent manager is available under schedule along with the rule number 4, and the consent manager's obligations are separately given in part B. I will try to spend some time on this rule as well as on the minors rule, and rest of it we will discuss as and when some questions are taken up for discussion. Now, as consent manager is concerned, I see that slowly there is more clarity in the marketplace about the role of the consent manager, though in pockets still people are unable to fully understand the role of a consent manager. Many people think consent manager is an agent of the data fiduciary, whereas the law prescribes that consent manager is going to be a trusted representative of the data principal. Now, the ministry has continued to hold its view on consent manager being similar to the account aggregator under the RBI scheme, which, as many of you know personally, I don't endorse. But that is, I think, for the time being, try to restrict the role of a consent manager to a platform which is like a in an technical intermediary, the definition of intermediary as given in the Information Technology Act, and the consent manager will be just passing on the information which is the request for consent received from the data fiduciary to the data principal, and the data principal provide his confirmation, which will be conveyed once again to the data fiduciary. So this will happen on automatically on the technical platform without the consent manager having the visibility to the data. In the other sense, the consent manager does not know what data is passing on from the data principal to the data fiduciary, but he will act as an intermediary. The utility of such a consent manager is very, very low, but what the rule perhaps thinks is that there will be certain data fiduciaries who hold the personal data of an individual. And when another data fiduciary wants a similar information, then that similar information can be passed on from data fiduciary 2 to data fiduciary 1 through the consent manager. This is what being done in the account aggregator model, but it was not actually an ideal system for the consents under DPDPA, but somehow we have not, in fact, we have to say that we have failed to convince the ministry that this model will not be suitable, and perhaps it may require some change sooner or later. Okay, so I hope if you have any questions on this consent manager at this point of time, I can address it straight away. Do anybody have any views on this consent manager?
Sir, audible.
Yeah.
So this consent manager idea is to get the consent for a particular data process by the fiduciary from the principal. That is idea.
Yeah.
Now you are explaining that there may be a data exchange between the fiduciary and the other fiduciary.
Yeah.
But the consent manager is not meant for that purpose. Data exchange is different. Consent obtaintion, consent closure is a different mechanism. That is my understanding. I am right?
Now, say the data principal needs to have an account maintained with the consent manager. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Second, the consent manager will also have an account relationship with data fiduciaries 1, 2, 3, 4, like that. Okay.
Right.
So when a data principal goes to a data fiduciary and wants a service, okay, we normally fill up the form or whatever is that, and we individually enter our name, address, etc., and it is directly consumed by the data fiduciary as of today. Okay. Now, what will happen is there will be, let us say this data fiduciary 1 is wants to use the consent manager, and he already has a contract with the consent manager. He has to provide an option to the data principal that when he is filling up the application form, he has to give a drop down that either I will sit and type all these details, or you collect information from the consent manager who already has this information. Okay. So it's a drop-down menu which has to be provided in every consent form, where the data principal, like this automatic filling of the application form, it is nothing more than that. Say, like automatic filling of the application form, he chooses the consent manager. Then the data principal fiduciary platform will have to send the request for consent to the consent manager. Now, consent manager has to identify that the request has come from a data fiduciary who is his client. It has come for information about a data principal who also is his client. Then after deciding about that, then he should find out where that information resides, either within his platform or with some other data fiduciary, who should also be a platform member, and then ask that data fiduciary 2 to send the information directly to data fiduciary 1 in an encrypted channel, like what happens in an account aggregator model. Are you getting this point? So at that point of time, what is happening is a request is moving from data fiduciary to consent manager. From the consent manager, it has to again come back to the data principal, to whom the consent manager says that I have got a request from such and such a data fiduciary. Please confirm whether I can give the information. While this data principal is waiting on the data fiduciary 1's consent form, where he has chosen the consent manager, is waiting for the next, let us say, the screen. Okay. Now, after this consent manager sends a request for permission to the data principal, he will get a pop-up or something like that, and he will click that pop-up, and then the consent manager will now try to fetch the information. They have actually given some illustrations here. 2 illustrations they have given. One illustration in which the platform may be having the information with itself, in which case it will immediately provide that information to the data fiduciary. But in some cases, if the information has to be fetched from a designated another data fiduciary, it has to send a request now to data fiduciary 2 and then tell data fiduciary 2, this is the information which is required to be submitted at the request of the client so and so. Please submit it directly to data fiduciary 1. At that time, this data fiduciary 2 has to check that the request has come from the right consent manager with whom it has got an account relationship. It has to also identify that the data principal for whom the data has to be provided is correctly identified and it is his client. Third, it has to identify who is the data fiduciary 1 to whom the data has to be sent. So 3 verifications it has to do. After that, it will send the data to the data fiduciary 1. And when that comes, it populates the form in a manner in which the service can be provided, which means that all through this 5 or 6 data exchanges, this data principal will be waiting and waiting and waiting on the data fiduciary one's platform, expecting that anytime the process will be completed. So this is what is going to happen here. What we were suggesting to the ministry earlier was that consider the data consent manager as a trusted data fiduciary, trusted by the data principal, and the data principal will load certain personal information as a repository with this consent manager, so that when the request from the data fiduciary comes, this consent manager should consider that he already has the consent of the data principal for sharing that information and submit the information to the data fiduciary 1, so that the process will not unnecessarily burden the data movement across the network. Somehow, as I told you, that we have not been capable of convincing the ministry, and they are stuck with the account aggregator model with which they are familiar, because that was also a system which was developed by DPA, that is the part of the ministry only, and it has been adopted by the RBI. But anyway, so what I feel is that in a way they have converted this consent manager into a glorified log management person, because the obligations of the consent manager includes that he has to keep a record of consents given, consents denied or withdrawn by the data principal, and all the notices which might have been received and exchanged. He does not have a visibility to the data which has been transferred, but he may have a visibility to the notice given by the data fiduciary. The data fiduciary's notice will list what information is required, but when the data principal returns the information, that is not visible to the consent manager, which means that he blindly sees that some data is flowing from here to there, and hopefully that information is what the notice has asked, and he will keep a record that on such and such a date and time a notice was issued by this data fiduciary 1 to this data principal, and I fetched that information, or I got the consent from the data principal and enabled the passage of the information either from my own data store or from the data store of another data fiduciary. So he just keeps that log record without knowing what has moved in. That is why I call this as a kind of a glorified log keeping, and that information has to be kept for 7 years. See, in case the consent manager is not going to have any visibility to the data, then we don't have any personal data handled by the consent manager at all as far as the data is flowing through. He still keeps the personal data with respect to the account, that is, who is the account person and what is his KYC, that he is having. But he doesn't know what is the information which the notice requires. Since he is not having visibility of that, this person actually handles a very minimal level of personal data, or in the transaction he has got zero personal data, no sensitive personal data. Even if sensitive personal data is passed on, he doesn't have visibility to that, which means that his role is very much limited. It is just like somebody keeping a business account where there is details of the person and the transactions. And see, the Act envisages that consent can be given, it can be withdrawn, it can be monitored during by the consent manager. Now, how can he monitor the consent if he doesn't know what is the information which has been passed on? So this rule actually dilutes the role of the consent manager. Say if the rule had exceeded the authority given in the act, we could have called it as ultra wise, but this is not ultra wise. Only thing is it has given powers which are very much under what was permitted under the act, which was well designed for the purpose of let's say one, handling the consent fatigue, so that the data principal need not provide consent again and again. So the data fiduciary will automate, this consent manager will handle that kind of a thing. That is not possible today. Secondly, this consent manager system, as we understood, was giving an opportunity for development of specialized consent managers. This language issue, then the minors issue, many of these things could have been handled by specialized consent managers, but unfortunately, the ministry has not understood the full concept or potential of the consent manager and fallen back on what they already knew. This is the classic role fix kind of a thing which we talk about in the management circles. What they know, they think that is the role of the consent manager. I don't know whether Justice Sri Krishna had that concept in mind. So this is one of the disappointments we have as far as the consent manager is concerned. Okay, anything else?
Naavi sir, Suresh here.
Yeah.
One question.
Yeah.
So there could be a possibility that there may be many consent managers. So many multiple, data aggregators. So
Yes.
the list should be in a drop down available for the data principal to transfer the data
Correct.
through a certain
Yes.
thing.
Yeah.
So this data is maintained by the DPP, the list of consent managers, right?
Yes.
Is that my understanding? Okay.
Correct.
But there is a possibility that I think this certain data may be with some certain consent managers. Certain personal data may be with certain other consent managers.
Correct.
For example,
Correct.
healthcare data may not be with a consent manager A,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
financial data may be with them. So
Correct.
then what is the mixture here? So if a person kind of goes through that this thing, okay, there is a swapping of this thing. So is there any chance of they getting aggregated data between themselves and then consolidating the data?
Say if my health data is with say H1 and my bank data is with say B2, and I am supposed to give the consent to B1, okay, who is the first data fiduciary, then in the drop down menu I may have to select both B2, which is having the like to like banking information, whereas the health information is not with the bank. So if I have to give both health information and bank information to data fiduciary 1, I will have to select more than one destination data suppliers, and I should know that this banking information which this first data fiduciary is asking is available with bank 2, with whom also I am a client. And if I am going to a hospital and asking, they are asking for some information, and that hospital information is not available with the second bank, it will be available with another hospital with whom I might have earlier had an interaction. So I need to select more than one in the drop down menu, which is not going to happen. And even if that was possible, the consent manager now has to pick some data from the bank too and some data from the hospital too, and then supply it to this first data fiduciary. But he will not know what information to be picked from the bank, what information to be picked up from the hospital. Therefore, it will fail. That is, if the information is available in a chunk with one other data fiduciary, it can be transferred. But if the data is distributed with multiple data fiduciaries, then the data principal cannot designate any specific data fiduciary who can give the information as required for this particular service. The consent manager himself does not have all this information. He only has the information of the name, address, and maybe the email address and the mobile number. Rest of the personal data associated with that account holder is not visible to the data consent manager as per what the ministry is telling, which means that it will be impossible for this consent manager to provide any value added service in this whole process unless this is changed. I think we are killing this concept of consent manager. So that is my view. If anybody else has any different view, they can express. Otherwise, anyway, this will be one of the things which we have to put in our recommendations to the ministry. We will continue to do that, whether they accept it or not. Okay.
So,
Think over it. Yeah.
So, is it required by law to have a consent manager, as a human, as a consent manager? Because the all the discussion actually points out that not having a human consent manager is more beneficial from the business point of view, and also from the perspective of current technology to manage and to deploy. So is it so that a consent manager has to be human, or it is on the
consent manager has to be a platform. Consent manager has to be a platform. Platform may be managed by an individual or a company, that is different. Okay, but it is an organization. Okay, that platform should be one which is having an interoperable nature. It will be used by data fiduciary 1, 2, 3, 4, hundreds, thousands, 10,000 data fiduciaries. All of them should be capable of embedding it into the consent collection system and provide the option to the data principal that instead of actually filling up all the details as required for the given service, he will be able to just indicate his connection with a consent manager with some kind of an identity like an account number or something like that, because consent managers also need to have an ID associated with the particular client. So it is like instead of giving the full Aadhaar number, you give a virtual Aadhaar number. Like that, they will be giving the account number associated with XYZ consent manager, so that the platform will send the request to that consent manager saying that we want information about your client number so and so. Now, what is the information required? That will be part of the notice, which is something which is there in front of me in the form, which I would have otherwise filled up, or I would have used auto filling mode or something like that. So that is how it is going to be. It is not an individual consent, a human who is called the consent manager. If the consent management platform is owned by an individual software developer, you can say that there is only one person who is handling that. But if it is in the most of the normal, and anyway, he is not going to be approved, because one of the criteria by which this credentials of consent manager is indicated is that it has to be a company registered in India, and it has to have a minimum net worth of 2 crores. So it is not feasible to have an individual. Okay, Abhijit?
Yeah, sir. Thank you for the elaborate explanation, sir. If I can extend my question, where you said that it is organization, I got that point. Within the organization, like there should be some person who is responsible, like in case of any breach or in case of any prosecution needs to propagate. In case it is a system, like consent manager is a system, then who is liable actually, like? how the liability will be set?
The owner of the platform is a company. They should have a compliance officer, or if it is considered a significant data fiduciary, they should have a DPO. They will have their own CISO and other things. So in case of data breach and other things, there are officials who will be responsible for that. But what I am saying is, in case this consent manager's work is limited to maintaining the account details, which is the name and address, email address and mobile of the person, all the other information is not visible to him, there is no sensitive information with the consent manager, so he need not be considered as a significant data fiduciary. So he will not have that sensitivity risk. Okay, he may have large quantity of information, but all the information is just name, email address and the mobile number, which is more or less like a demographic information today, and any breach of that is going to cause only a very low level of damage to the person. Okay, because rest of the information which may contain sensitive information, like when the data fiduciary requesting for the information is a bank and it is asking for a CIBIL score or something like that, then CIBIL sends that information. That may be a sensitive information, but CIBIL will directly send it to the data fiduciary, and the consent manager is not going to know what is the CIBIL score of this particular person. So if it is a bank statement, as we given in one of the illustrations, the bank statement will not be visible to the consent manager. It will also flow in a separate channel from the bank to the data fiduciary. Therefore, the risk of the consent manager is very, very minimal. Yeah.
And sir, are the data principals will be informed at every step whenever there is a data exchange by the?
Yes. Yes. In fact, the system should, at the consent manager's platform, once the request comes from the data fiduciary's place to the consent manager, he has to again send a request to the data principal. That's why I said the data principal is trying to fill up the form in the data fiduciary's website while he is waiting. After he fills up the consent manager's details, the data fiduciary sends it there, and a pop-up has to come there from the consent manager saying that I have received a request from such and such a data fiduciary. Is it your this thing, like your authentication and other things which come for various other things? Then you have to approve that. After you approve that, the approval again has to transmit itself from the data fiduciary's network to the consent manager. Then the consent manager will start moving to find out where from I can get the information as requested by this data fiduciary. And if it is available with XYZ, say another data fiduciary, he will have to send that request, and then again that data fiduciary has to provide the information. In all these places, in 2-3 occasions, identity of the person sending the message, your normal data package has to be identified, because it is possible that the first request from the data fiduciary to the consent manager may go correctly, but next time when the information is to be sent back from him, there can be a man in the middle attack, and that may go to a different data fiduciary. So security issues of such nature will come. So every time a response is made either by the consent manager or the second data fiduciary, there has to be a verification of the identity of the information requester, which means that in terms of your network management, there will be some latency for all those things also. So look at all these things. This consent manager system, as suggested by the ministry under the rules, is unlikely to be of great interest. It may not take off unless changes are made into the system. Maybe it will take a little time for the ministry to understand what I am saying today. Others also will start telling that, and probably it can be changed, because we are talking of only the rules. Rules can be changed at the departmental level. We don't have to go back to the Parliament for any changes, because the Act has already said certain things about consent manager, what is his role, and I feel that this rule is only providing certain things which are very much less than what the consent manager is expected to do. So it can always be updated. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Fine. We will come back to it if there are any questions, but towards the end of the this thing. See, as you
Naavi
have said,
sir,
yeah,
Naavi sir, only 7 years keeping it would be a kind of overkill, no? Assume that
for
I
this
only
kind of
for one,
activity, for the
for
kind of
only,
activity they are talking of, definitely it is an overkill. Okay.
absolutely.
If they had,
Because I might be contacting a particular data fiduciary for only one kind of activity, right? And it could be for only one purpose.
yeah,
And the purpose is done. And why should they retain the data? And because it is their responsibility then, right?
Yeah.
Maintaining security practices. Okay, I understand. Yeah, thanks.
and
sir.
anyway, the first data fiduciary, suppose you have availed the service once, and then afterwards your service is over, then the purpose is over, then the under the other rule, even if it is a social media intermediary or anybody, you have to mandatorily delete it within the next 3 years, even if there is no withdrawal of the consent. If there is a withdrawal request, you may have to take a decision immediately, subject to your not requiring it for any other legal purpose. Okay.
Understood.
But
Right.
if no contact is made back by you to the data fiduciary, at the end of 3 years, you are supposed to anyway delete it. Okay.
Yeah.
Whereas the consent manager has to keep the log records for 4 more years. It doesn't make any sense, but anyway, that is what is happening here. So the Act was talking of managing, reviewing, and withdrawing the consent. Now, what do you mean by reviewing? If I don't know what is the information which has been given, then I don't know what to review. Okay. So I think this is not properly conceived, and we have to live with that for the time being. Okay. Fine. Okay. Now, obligations.
Sir, if I can ask one more question to you, sir, at this stage.
Yeah.
You said in your rule number 22 on that first slide, right? You said that there is going to be a special officer, blah, blah, which is the totally new one, right?
Yeah.
Are they going to be totally different from the DPB kind of role?
Yes, yes.
Is
They
it
are
totally different?
officials of the Ministry of Information Technology. I will come to that and show you three officials are going to be designated. They are from the Ministry of Information Technology. Like today in ITA 2000, for UPSC or something like that, there is a cyber law officer or something like that. A joint secretary or somebody like that, they will designate somebody. Okay.
Sure, sir. Thanks, sir. Thanks, sir.
And one of the conditions or obligations of the consent manager is that he shall not subcontract any of his functions to another data processor. This was all relevant if this person had the ability to collect and interact with sensitive information. If his activity is going to be restricted to maintaining just the account and then the log records, which are all anyway non-personal log record, non-personal data, there is no need even to say that there is no need for say subcontracting or something like that. Today, even an OTP is actually subcontracted. Many of the data fiduciaries don't maintain their own OTP. There perhaps is another service provider who is providing the OTP service. Am I correct? I think most of you are in the industry. Okay. So that cannot be done by the consent manager, which means that he should have his own OTP generating and management system, all for handling very innocuous non-personal data, which is the log record, and very limited amount of personal data, which is the name and email address. Okay. So I feel there is a need to rethink on that. Okay.
Naavi sir, Murugan this side. Okay. So maybe unless this concern manager platform going to be, will there be anybody who is going to authorize, yes, he is a right consent manager?
Data Protection Board. This is like they have to register themselves with the Data Protection Board.
One is register. No, or
No,
they are following
at
the
the time
rules.
of registration, they will evaluate the credentials like this 2 crore capital, then the other things which you are seeing now on the slide, that is the not having conflict with the data fiduciary.
So
Okay.
till that happens, there is no progress towards the DPDPA actually, because that is the first thing should happen,
You can
consent manager.
continue to take consent directly, no? So as what is happening today, if I am a data fiduciary, I am collecting the consent directly, that will continue. This consent manager was an additional facility which the Act had made possible. That is not going to happen. That's all. You can continue to be your own consent collection person. Okay, don't call him as a consent manager. Now, what you do today when you have a form in which you ask the person to fill up his name, address, etc. for availing the service, that will continue. You may not have either the drop-down menu, or if some people register, now all account aggregators may register. Okay. With whatever minimal changes they need to make, they will make, and let us say they become approved consent managers. That doesn't mean that the client will use their services, so that menu item will be there, but he will still fill it up on his own, because there is no point in going and opening an account with a consent manager and then use his services. And for the consent managers also, it is not practically useful to provide this kind of a service. Okay. Maybe you need to think a little more. I am talking because I have been thinking on this for last 3-4 years. It requires a further thought process. You please think on that once again. Okay. Okay. Now this 2 crores and all that is again only meaningless. Okay, fine. Now standards for processing of government benefits. And there is one more section under which this research organizations, when they can process, there also the same standards are there. There is a schedule 2. Basically, what the schedule 2 suggests is like your privacy principles which are there in GDPR, that there should be lawful processing, there should be purpose minimization, data minimization, accuracy, minimization of data retention, reasonable security safeguards, intimation to the data principle in certain cases. So these are what are called the standards for processing of personal data by government organizations for processing requests for government benefits like certificates and other things. The same thing is also applicable to the research organizations. Okay, that is rule number 5. Now, there is rule number 6, which talks about reasonable security safeguards. So generally, we get excited when something about security comes in, but this is again nothing different from what was already there in SPDI rules. Basically, it just reiterates that information security practices such as encryption, such as obfuscation, masking, or virtual tokens, etc., may be required. So there is nothing great here. These are all the normal security requirements which you do in your ISMS, and even without this thing, when you say security practice, we would have had access control requirements, log monitoring, business continuity, detection of unauthorized access, and so on. All these things are part of the general information security system, which is also prescribed here as required for personal data. Now, data breach notification, basically we look at the time period required. Now, under this act, data breach notification refers to personal data breach, and it has to be given both to the Data Protection Board as well as to the data principal. And the word used is without delay. In the earlier version of the draft rules, it said forthwith. They have replaced that word forthwith with here as without a delay. And within 72 hours, more detailed information may have to be given. So 72 hours is for the second data breach notification. first notification has to go without delay, which means that as soon as you become aware of a confirmed personal data breach, you have to immediately send some kind of a intimation both to the DPB as well as to the data principal with whatever information you can give, and follow it up with more information to the data protection board and to the data principal, probably within 72 hours. And if you cannot give it within 72 hours, you should seek permission from the data protection board. Okay.
Here,
It
I
also
have a
includes
doubt.
the,
I have a
Naavi sir,
doubt.
it also includes the certain.
Exactly. Within 6 hours of
No,
identification of the
see,
breach,
certain
talks.
guidelines are not going away. Okay. So if there is a personal data breach, it is also a data breach under certain guidelines.
Okay.
And if certain guidelines says within 6 hours, at 6 hours you can match with the without delay. Okay, because even certain agrees that if you need more time, you can seek more times for more details. The first report has to be within that 6 hours. Here, the first report has to be without delay, which means that you can take 6 hours or even 8 hours, 10 hours, but anyway, within the day, it has to be sent. Okay.
Naavi sir, there is a difference between certain reporting and data protection rules.
Yeah.
Certain says you need to inform it and bargain the time for the reporting, whereas here they are giving a deadline for 72 hours to share the evidences and information to the board about data breach, as per my understanding.
No, I think even here you can ask the DPB that the investigation is on. We don't have full information. This is the information I have until now. Please give us more time. They will give. I think this is inherent in the rules itself. Okay.
Okay.
It is required to notify to certain as well as the DPDP.
Yes, if the breach is confirmed as personal data breach, it will go to both the places. If it is non-personal data breach, it goes only to certain.
Okay.
Okay. Fine.
What you report to certain is technical nature, where what you report to the data breach, whether it is the data principal or board, is the breach of personal data.
Yes, Rakesh. Yes. Yeah. Happy to see Rakesh here. Yeah. I could recognize his voice anyway. Yeah. Fine. Okay. Data breach notification. Okay. Now,
one question.
Yeah.
When they're using this word instrumentalities of the state, right? What exactly are they meaning by that? Can be a public sector undertaking be considered an instrumentality of the state, or who is intended to be covered by this?
If the equity holding is with the government, yes. Actually,
BDA.
there is a constitution section. I think it is Article 12 or something like that. I may not remember the exact number, which defines the instrumentality. Now, examples of that instrumentality includes, let's say, municipality or the
BDA. Or
Yeah.
BDA, sir. Bengaluru Development Authority.
Correct.
All such companies are
Yeah.
intermediate.
Yes. Public sector organizations is one. Second is this kind of departmental organizations which have an independent existence, and wherever you can say that an organization is empowered to enter into contracts, okay, and such organization in their own name. That is, if BDA can enter into a contract as BDA, not as Karnataka government, then that could be considered as an instrumentality of the state, because 100% of the funding is from the government. If there are public sector undertakings, perhaps we may look at the holding, whether it's below 50 or something like that. But there is an understanding of what is an instrumentality of the state. Okay.
Thank you.
Sir, Nagendra here.
Yeah.
So there is no clarity on how this breach should be notified to individual, is it?
No.
What kind of media or what
There is,
method or?
No, it is there. That is in the rule. If you go, a description of the breach, including the nature and extent and the
No,
time.
that I understand. Those are different properties.
Ah.
How do you communicate or how do you notify to the individual? Through what media? Is it should be private one or TV or newspaper or any other something like that?
It is not mentioned. It is not mentioned. So hopefully, if you have an email, you will send it by email. If you don't have an email, then sending it by physical registered email, registered mail is a very expensive proposition. Then the next option is to actually give newspaper advertisements. If you see, DPDPA had clearly indicated when you have to.
Correct.
This, if there's more than 500, you have to give.
Correct. There is a clarity in HIPAA. That's where I'm trying to understand.
Here it is not there. It is not there. It is left to the data fiduciary to determine how best you are communicating the breach to the individual. So that is why when you have the personal data collection, one of the essential parameters is the email. If you don't collect email, there will be a problem. Now, as far as the legacy data is concerned, we might not have collected the emails for most of the legacy data holders. So if we are trying to get the consent for the existing data principles, definitely this is going to be a problem. Probably you have to resort to newspaper advertisements and other for that. Okay, and also many times emails may bounce, and people would have changed their emails also. Those are the issues which you have to manage. That is why legacy consent management, consent of legacy data principles is a headache of its own, because you have to send the notice, get back the response. Some people will say yes, some people will say no, some people will not respond. You have to keep track of that and say perhaps send a reminder. Then how many times you can send a reminder is also a question. If you send too many reminders, that itself may become a spam. Okay, these are all the issues which are there. Ultimately, at the end of a reasonable period, if you don't get a positive response, the legacy personal data has to be discarded. Now, how to convince the business manager, the CEO and marketing person that what we have acquired over the last 7 years, I have to take it out. It is the challenge for the DPO. Okay?
Sir, Ashok here.
Yeah.
Sir, this deletion, many of the times organizations just give some kind of reply saying that we don't delete data at all, and we are on some litigation hold or legal hold or things like that. So how do we address such situations?
That is acceptable under the law. That is, deletion is only when it is not required to be retained by under any other law in force or for securing your own interests. That is very clear. So that is why when a request for erasure comes, it has to be documented, escalated to the right authority, like what we have called as governance committee, and it should not be handled automatically by the DPO. Okay, because you never know that your legal department only will know whether there is any reason why we should hold it or something like that. Okay, so that possibility is there. And what it says is, before you delete, this is in respect of rule number 8, which says for e-commerce and other these things, after 3 years, if there is no need to maintain, you should delete it. But before you delete, 48 hours before the deletion, you have to send another notice to the person saying that since you have not come back, I am going to delete it after 48 hours. At that time also, if the data fiduciary comes back, logs in into his account, then it gets renewed. Okay.
Sir, I think this particular obligation is there for 3 kind of companies. One is the online gaming platform, social media, and one more e-commerce. So what about other companies? Should they continue to retain the data? Should they delete the data?
No. See, once the purpose is over, you are under an obligation to delete. Anything else will have to be within a reasonable time. What is reasonable time? You have to determine. It cannot be more than 3 years. Okay. I was recommending only 1 year, even earlier, because under the Information Technology Act, 1 year is the time after which you have to renew every privacy policy. So 1 year is the time which we were recommending under DGPSI. So within that 1 year, if you want to reduce, you can reduce it further. Yeah.
So,
Yes, sir.
continuing with what the question was asked, so does that mean when we collect information for sales and marketing, etc., we need to renew this information every year?
Yes. That is what Information Technology Act has said. If you are talking of what we call as privacy policies expire after 1 year. Okay, that is there in one of the certain guidelines itself. Those of you who have followed certain guidelines, you can check the last guideline says that. So that is the interpretation we can take, that after 1 year, you need to get a renewal. It's also necessary if you are providing any service which requires decision making or disclosure. Anyway, you have to maintain accuracy. Now, accuracy is also something which you have to periodically check. No, you cannot take some information and keep it for 3 years. So periodical renewal is required. Now, what is a reasonable time is a matter of debate. So the companies will have to decide a data retention policy in which you ensure that your management sticks its neck out and says that you keep it for 1 year and delete it afterwards. If they want to keep it for 5 years, then the risk of storage or during storage is an additional risk you have to manage. Okay. You will not get protection from the DPB if there is any data breach after that reasonable time. They will definitely ask why you kept it for such a long period. Okay.
Sir, if a
Sir,
company is basically storing the data and archiving it, maybe by the means of some pseudonymization, etc., so will it also be counting in deletion?
No, that is no. Even if you pseudonymize, that is an additional security measure which you are taking for security. But you are still retaining as long as you are having the pseudonymization table. If it is anonymized, you also are not able to re-identify, then you can claim that I have converted this erstwhile personal data into non-personal data. Therefore, there is no DPDPA angle there. You know the difference between anonymization and pseudonymization, you have to clearly understand. Pseudonymization is a reversible process. Anonymization is an irreversible process. Though technology people will say, I will be able to use many technologies to de-anonymize, any person using extraordinary efforts to de-anonymize is actually hacking into information, and he is liable for hacking under Information Technology Act. Okay. Are you getting this point? We will discuss this in some other occasion in greater detail if necessary. Yeah.
So basically, if I pseudonymize my data and if I, as a consultant, give advice to company to pseudonymize it, and is it counting in deletion? This is my.
No, it is not counted as deletion. Anonymization is counted as deletion, as I am telling now. Okay, because anonymization is a process in which the identity parameters are irreversibly removed and destroyed. This mapping is destroyed completely. Therefore, even the person who has anonymized is not able to re-identify. Okay. Now you can say anonymity, that this and all the technology, they are all extraordinary efforts. Like any encryption is considered encryption beyond a particular standard is considered as security. Okay, is secured information. So in HIPAA and other things, breach of a secured PHA is not considered as a breach. But a hacker can decrypt even the best of the encryption. So that responsibility, the encryptor cannot be held responsible for doing something which is not decryptable at all by quantum computing or something like that. So he will use reasonable security measures. And if somebody uses extraordinary measures to decrypt it, then he will be considered as a hacker and punished under cyber crime law. Same thing has to be applied for anonymized data being re-identified by use of special techniques. That is my personal view. Okay.
Naavi sir, Murugan this side. So do I have to inform the data principal if I am anonymizing his data?
You can, and because it is anyway equivalent to deletion. Okay. Now, whether you should give him prior notice and all, the law is not clear. Now, if you want to delete it, now they are talking of 48 hours prior notice. Is it not? Now, we can adopt that as a policy under DGPS, right? That even for anonymization, we can give a 48 hours notice saying that I'm going to anonymize, and tomorrow if you want to have right of access and other things, you don't expect that because I will also not know whether I have your information or something like that. Because
yeah, that's what we have, because tomorrow he should not come actually.
Yes, yes. So now that there is an indication of this 48 hours rule, which was not there earlier, that is 48 hours before the deletion, you are supposed to intimate the data principal. We can use that same norm for this anonymization also. Anonymization is treated as equivalent to deletion, but again, the rights of access and other things will not be available to him subsequently. And even if he gives right to erasure, I will not even be able to know whether his information is there with me or not. That is the
do the data principal have the knowledge of anonymization?
Who?
What is anonymization if my data principal is not having? Tomorrow he will come back to me.
He will come back. You have to, which means that in your notice of anonymization, you have to make him understand what anonymization means. You have to tell him that you will no longer be able to access this data or any other rights associated with the data.
Okay, thank you.
Alok, this side, just one addition to the anonymization. I understand it is equivalent to deletion, but still if hackers get into it and the data is de-anonymized, then it will be out in the dark web. So generally the deletion, what our assumption is always if the data principal say erasure, it has to be hard pass from everywhere, because there is always a chance, and since the technology is evolving and the hackers are also evolving, they can always de-anonymize.
Alok, there is no 100% security anyway. Okay.
Correct.
I gave the example of encryption. Now you encrypt data and think that it is secure, but somebody has got a decryption because he is using extraordinary systems. I gave the example of quantum computing. Like that, they may have some facility with which they can decrypt. Now, do you want the encryptor to take responsibility for unlimited efforts of decryption? I think we have to draw a line somewhere. He will take reasonable security. For example, he should not use an encryption method which is very simple to decrypt. But as long as the industry may develop certain standards, let us say. Earlier also, in the first version of DPDPA, PDPA, there was a provision that the DPB will come up with anonymization standards.
Right.
So, but now it is not there, but industry has to develop what is a reasonable anonymization standard. And then if that is broken, you should defend with the data protection board when there is a challenge. Obviously, this will perhaps come as an inquiry, and DPB will ask why I cannot put penalty on you. At that time, you have to have evidence to say that what I did was the best, in good faith, best of anonymization. Beyond that, what happens, please don't hold me responsible. You have to plead like that and get into the discussion with the data protection board. Okay.
Yeah, sir, got it. But whatever we discussed with so far with the European DPOs, they didn't believe in anonymization as per GDPR. They generally recommend us, if you want to delete, do the delete. Don't go into anonymization mode. So I'm just saying, maybe from the DPDP, hard delete is always the way. But if someone wants to put anonymization in, always the thing.
The minister himself has several times said, don't be bogged down by EU interpretation, GDPR interpretation. What we have been doing, if those of you who know me have been telling that, let them have their interpretation. For example, even the employees. Now the employee data is considered as legitimate use in India. GDPR doesn't use that, no?
Right.
So there is going to be difference. And let us try to develop the Indian standard and try to convince the data protection board not to refer to the GDPR standard, and either they should come up and say this is the standard, otherwise they should accept the industry standard.
Right.
Okay, we have to develop that. That is the responsibility of organizations like FDPPI. We need to say this is what is reasonable. And beyond this, I am giving you an option that if somebody uses extraordinary measures, please consider that as a Section 66 offense under Information Technology Act, because a person has decrypted or de-anonymized without my permission. Therefore, you please make him responsible. Remember again in the earlier version of PDPA, there was this criminal punishment for de-anonymization. That also has been lost in the second and third version of the DPDPA, which we are now looking at. You go back to PDPB 2018, there is a section there which says that there will be, I think, 3 years imprisonment for de-anonymization without permission.
Sir,
Okay.
Sir Abhijit here. Sir, I think the erase option or the erase of the data should also have a validation mechanism if it is not there to actually means is there any mechanism actually to validate the eraser of the data, that all the data has been actually honestly deleted?
The data fiduciary should develop a methodology by which they can get the assurance certificate if you want from an auditor.
Answer.
Certainly, you can do that.
Yes.
By saying what method you have used. And beyond that, I think you may have to seek the assistance of a third-party auditor to confirm that you have actually deleted. There is no other way, I suppose.
And sir, over the on the discussion topic of eraser deletion versus anonymization, I think anonymization in best of my knowledge is anonymization versus deletion also comes under the debate of having asset versus data. So anonymization is actually a technique, and which acquisition of such technique will actually result in the asset. It will accumulate as an asset for the company or the organization who has purchased them. So if we are asking, or any organization is saying that they are anonymizing the data, they have to also delete the anonymizing algorithm also. That is like destroying their. So they have to destroy their actually asset for that.
No, they have to discard the mapping data. Then it becomes anonymization. Pseudonymization becomes anonymization when the mapping data is destroyed irrevocably, which is a DOD standard. Deletion of the mapping data is required. Okay, but the data itself, which is anonymized personal data, that is erstwhile personal data after anonymization, is not data which is identifiable to an individual. If you meet that requirement, obviously it is out of DPDPA contention, no applicability. DPDPA is applicable for personal data, which means the data which is identifiable to an individual. Now, if it is not identifiable to an individual, it is no longer personal data. So DPDPA does not come in. You have to only prove that that is non-personal data. And for the purpose of big data, data analytics, or disclosure to another data analytics company, you must adopt this anonymization in the strictest manner. Get anonymization certifications, assurance from security professionals if necessary. If you have used a software, that software should have the assurance certificate. And then you can say that I have passed through this personal data set through this software. What comes out is non-personal data, which I am disclosing with not considering it as a personal data, which means this algorithm, within that algorithm, it should actually destroy the mapping. It should not store the mapping data even within the algorithm in any manner. So that algorithm is to be certified for that purpose.
Naavi sir, can the data principal has the right to say that at any point of my situation, my data should not be anonymized? Does he has the right to say that?
I personally think that it is amounting to say that you should not delete. I'm not sure. Okay. Perhaps he can say, I think we should allow that. If a person specifically gives you that kind of an instruction, it is better not to argue with him, because he is putting an infinite standard for anonymization as a permission.
Correct.
Naavi sir, Manish Mathur here. One question: if any data principal execute his or her right to erase the data, and we person or the data fiduciary delete or permanently that information from systems, but what about the data being backed up and kept in different medias?
No. Deletion means including your backup, third backup, fourth backup, everything.
Yes.
It's not only the current system.
So first of all, you should have a tracking of data inventory, and if it is there in multiple places, then erasure becomes extremely difficult to be certified. It's not possible to delete it in one media and then leave the rest. Okay.
Naavi sir.
Yeah.
Naavi sir,
Time is up.
Ramesh here, it's already 8:20.
I know.
Two things I just wanted to propose. One is that I would request the entire audience here, the team, to send your questions. Now obviously we need to continue the session for one more session by Mr. Naavi. So I would suggest the following. Please shoot your questions. Manju and myself will collate it and keep it ready. So next session, let the sir continue, complete it, and we will have an FAQ session separately. Otherwise, I understand. All of us have got different kind of clarifications in our mind. We will not be able to proceed in this way, is what I feel. Naavi sir, is it okay? Obviously, we need to have one more session, sir.
Last year also, when we discussed the first data, we extended it to the second session.
Yes.
Now I was about to say that.
The way you conduct it will go multiple sessions. So what I'm saying is now let them also apply their mind and come back to us with the questions. Let's have it as an FAQ, sir. That would be interesting. Yeah. Okay. And also we will have one session, Manju letter plan.
Yeah. Okay. Next.
Good evening, sir. Viresh Kumar here. Can I have a last question, sir?
Please.
Viresh Kumar here, sir.
Yeah.
Specific
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, specific with regard to adjudication process, where I think there is another need for another draft rules, because what happens insofar as IT Act, there is one adjudicating officer.
Yes.
Here, there is no judicial body as such.
Correct.
Or judicial wing. So, so how can all the members or the chairman can sign the orders or the judicial orders, or how that hearing would happen? There's no clarity on that.
Data Protection Board is an inquiry commission. Okay, it's like an inquiry commission. It has the powers of, say, taking decisions during the inquiry, including summoning of the people, etc., and also have procedures different from the civil procedure code. Okay, that is there. Now, as far as the orders to be passed, at present, DPDPA does not give the right to the Data Protection Board to pass any compensation order to the data principal. So that is, the Act itself is not providing that. Therefore, DPB does not have the power to provide the compensation. I heard your talk in the IDPS also, but you said there is some other civil procedure code, this thing where this power can be assumed or something like that. But as I perhaps look at, DPDPB does not provide for compensation to the data principal. That doesn't mean that DPB prohibits the data principal to claim compensation under ITA 2000. Now, it would have been nice if they had made a mention of this along with this rule, so that there would have been no doubt. But still, without any explicit bar on approaching the ITA adjudicator, I will say, please go to the ITA adjudicator. Now, section 43A will not be there. Leave that 43 capital A, but go to 43, which says that any diminishing of the value of the information residing inside a computer is considered a contravention. Under that 43, you should be able to seek the assistance of the adjudicator, and also link it to section 66 and have a criminal proceedings started. Okay, so both are possible. That is, the individual who has suffered a loss on account of a personal data breach. Only when there is a cause of action in terms of proving the loss, then he should be able to take ITA 2000, which is an existing process. What ministry must have thought of now is, why disturb what is already there? It's already there. If anybody suffers a loss on account of phishing or anything of that nature, which is identity theft, which is also part of the DPDPA, you are anyway having remedy under ITA 2000. So they have not disturbed that. They have restricted this DPDPB to only the industry disciplining, so that only the industry is fined or penalized for not following the compliance measures. I think that is what we should think of. That is why all adjudicating officers under ITA 2000 should be now trained on DPDPB or DPDPA 2023, and they should be able to interpret this data breach as a personal data breach. They should be able to take a view on what is the extent of loss which the data principal has suffered, and accordingly provide compensation. Yeah, Viresh?
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. In fact, even the penalty orders could also be passed by the board, sir, so far as penalty is concerned.
That penalty is on the data fiduciary.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Industry regulator fining the industry person, like RBI puts a fine on a penalty on a bank, data protection board will put a penalty on the data fiduciary. They will not even be fining the data principal, the data processor. Data processor's liabilities also have to be taken under ITA 2000. If I am a data fiduciary and I need to recover some money from the data processor, I have to invoke section 72 capital A of Information Technology Act and claim the compensation either from the adjudicator or from the civil court.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay, I think we'll stop here. So Manju will take care, but next week I am in Delhi around 15th. So next week I am not available next Wednesday. Then 22nd we have already fixed that quick heal this thing. So that is the situation as far as the next 2 weeks are concerned. But even if somebody sends the return this thing, we can provide answers to that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great, sir.
Yeah. And anyway, those of you who want a much larger discussion, please attend one of our CDPO courses, which may be happening in Bombay. We will be happy to spend 3 days, out of which substantial time we can spend on these things, because everything boils down to how to implement this. Now, we have not covered the minors and other things. We already have some solutions. By the time this rules gets passed, I will be perhaps having solutions on hand for this verifiable consent, which people are talking about that. So many of the things which pose a problem, we already have technical solutions. Okay, I'm trying to formalize that, and definitely within the next 1 month they will be available. Yeah.
Naavi, sir, we have shared that link for registration. So whoever has not become an FDPPA member, feel free to add that. And number 2, for the upcoming C.DPO.DA training program at Mumbai, and feel free to get in touch with us at the FDPPA website, and Mr. Adupu, our Mumbai chapter president. Looking forward to have all of you. And Manju, back to you quickly on the continuation of this session, probably after 20 seconds. That's all, sir. Great.
Okay.
Thank you very much, sir. Really appreciate it.
Manju, share my number, Manju.
Okay.
Yeah, you put it in the chat. Manju will do that anyway, if possible. Okay.
Yeah,
or you put it in the chat box. Whoever is remaining still, about 70 people are there.
Put my number 900-441-9020.
Okay, your number is there on the link page also, I think.
Yes.
FDPPA.
Yes, sir. That's why I'm saying FDPPA page that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. See you, friends.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Sir, before going, can I ask you one last question, if you allow?
Yeah, I am here. Others are
Okay.
not there. Okay, but tell me.
Okay. So, sir, this is with respect to legitimate use. So, as
Yeah.
the government has put employment related purposes under legitimate use, I assume that consent anyway will not play any part with respect to employment purposes. Let's say they can consent from employees. But does it also include, first of all, am I right? Is my opinion right? And secondly, does it also include contractual employees, contractual relations? Will it also be covered under employment purpose?
I will tell you my views. Contractual employees are data processors. They are not employees.
Yes.
You call them as contractual employees because the term is familiar with you, but they are data processors. Okay, whatever is applicable for them will apply to them. What was the other question which you asked?
Sir, the other question is now, let's say with respect to retention of their data. So the Act only talks about 3 classes of data fiduciaries mainly. And in the Act also it says that if the data principal is withdrawing their consent first, and if it is considered that the specified purpose is no longer being served.
Okay. Now, employees, the question which you asked is that whether consent is redundant as far as the employees is concerned. Okay,
Yes.
that's what the first question you asked. Now, under our DGPSI, okay,
Yes.
we are suggesting to companies that you have anyway legitimate use basis, but where possible, I am also suggesting that they will take a one-time consent as we take NDAs and others from employees, and so that we will try to take both, because you know that just because legitimate use is there, if I completely ignore consent, tomorrow I don't know how it will hit me, because tomorrow people will argue what is for employment purpose, what is not for employment purpose. Okay.
Yes.
For example, where the risk normally comes is when we give some welfare measures to our employees and other things. Now, tomorrow somebody may say, I never wanted these welfare measures, it is not related to employment. So that is not for employment. So I am suggesting to our clients that you take consent also, but inform the employees that we can process on legitimate use. So if at all there is an exceptional circumstance, which is basically information security related processing, don't raise any objection. I will not be able to provide you the benefits which GDPR is giving.
Correct.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much, sir.